Hey anglers, Eric Aldrich here, shooting another production with Brad Herring, my production assistant. Awesome guy, man. He does a great job with what he does, and really appreciate his help. He's a brother in Christ, and that's cool, Um, talking about how God works miracles in certain ways in our life. But I'll tell you, every catastrophe I've ever had, it's always turned out to be a blessing in disguise. And I want people to remember that. When you question why God does what God does, he's the greatest. He understands what we do, and that's important. We're going to talk a little bit about Sunline today, though. Sunline's my sponsor. Give me them awesome clothes, awesome hats, and it is the best line on the market, absolutely. And I'm so blessed to have them as a sponsor. People get confused about lines. Do I use monofilament? Do I use fluorocarbon? Do I use braid? What are the purposes for it? And I like to simplify it. I've got really basically a system down right now. I use probably 4 spools of line, and I'm going to show you what I do and what I do it for. Basically, I love to finesse fish on Lake Lanier, and when we're drop shotting, skipping jigs, and everything else, I start out with fluorocarbon, 7-pound sniper. Awesome line. It's why do you use 7-pound and not 6-pound or 8-pound? People ask me, and I'm just like, because I've grown to trust it. This is what I use for my finesse jigs, my finesse rigs, my drop shots, my skipping jigs, anything I'm using a spinning reel with gets my 7-pound sniper. Occasionally I'll put some braid on it, but for this purpose, this really serves what I need. Fluorocarbon, there's a lot of myths about it. People said fluorocarbon has no stretch, that's why it's so sensitive. In fact, fluorocarbon stretches as much or even a little bit more than monofilament. People don't realize that. What makes fluorocarbon so sensitive is the fact that it's dense. It's as dense as water. It sinks. If you can picture a PVC tube made out of plastic versus a steel rod made out of rebar, if you can imagine tapping on something far off, with that steel rod you would feel it would resonate back through your hand so hard, whereas the PVC would lose some of the feel for it. That's what basically fluorocarbon does. It's your steel rod. It's dense. It has a lot of sensitivity. I can feel a fish pick it up. I can feel a fish tap. And this stuff's incredible. It really, like I said, it adorns every rig I've got on my spinning reels. So if you're looking for, fishing jig heads, fishing finesse rigs around docks, fishing anything like that, or drop shots in deep water, I go with 7-pound sniper fluorocarbon. You can use 8, you can use 6, you can drop as low as 4, but this is what I use. If I do use the small XS1 brand of Sunline braid, I will still attach a liter of this fluorocarbon to keep fish from seeing it. So it's really a good deal. Secondarily, I like to fish crankbaits a lot. I love to crank. We're going to be shooting a show tonight about crankbaits, and that's going to be super cool. I like to go with 10-pound sniper assassin. It's a very good line for crankbaiting. It has little resistance. It's a low diameter, and it actually is great for cranking. You can feel the crankbait running across the bottom, bumping into objects, and you can also feel those fish suck it in. So really good line. This is what adorns everything that I use crankbaits with, or jerkbaits. Occasionally I will, though, go to a monofilament in some cases with a jerkbait if I want it to float a little bit. I don't want it to sink. The Sunline fluorocarbons do sink. Monofilament floats. So if I'm looking to get a neutral buoyancy or have that thing float up a little bit on my jerkbaits, my Spro mixed sticks, then I'll use the Sunline monofilament. I'll go up to 20-pound when I'm throwing top waters, where it doesn't really matter. I want that bait to float. If I'm throwing a top water bait, in most situations I'll put Sunline monofilament. It's one of the few resources where I actually use a monofilament line still. This is rare, and like I said, it uses it for topwater plugs, for a buzz bait. This has a lot of stretch to it, so when a fish hits it, before I even feel that fish, it gives them that extra half a second to suck it down and get those hooks impaled upon them. So it's a really good line for throwing topwaters, throwing buzz baits, anything. In this 20-pound test, you just can't break it. If you get hung up with this stuff, you got to get a dowel rod and pull it loose. So that's how strong it is, and you'll feel the stretch when you do that. Now, when I'm pitching a jig or fishing heavy cover, I'll go up to a 14-pound, maybe a 17-pound Sunline Sniper fluorocarbon. This line really transmits the hit to me. It's got enough stretch to let that fish hit, but it's got enough backbone where I can really set the hook on it. So when I'm flipping a jig into brush or into heavy cover, or really just even out on main lake when I'm fishing the drops with a jig, I'll use this 14-pound test. I also fish it on Texas rigs and other applications, but this suits all my needs for that application. Now let's move up to the bad boy here right now. Sunline FX2 frogging and flipping line. Now when I'm flipping really heavy cover like aquatic vegetation, or I'm throwing a frog or aquatic vegetation where I got to get that fish up immediately, or where I got to set the hook on a long cast, this stuff has zero stretch, 60-pound, and it will really yank those fish out of that cover, because once a fish pulls itself down into a hydrilla mat or any kind of line mats like that, you will feel you got to get that fish out of, because once he gets down there, he's got power to fight you. I want to keep him on top of that mat coming towards me, and that's where I yank on him with this 60-pound frog line. This stuff is awesome. You can't break it even with a dowel rod. You got to make sure, because if you try to pull it with your hand, it will actually cut your hand. It's that strong. And basically 7-pound fluorocarbon, 10-pound assassin fluorocarbon.